School district by school district, conservatives are starting to mobilize locally to fight the introduction of critical race theory in their children's curriculums. So is the tide finally turning against the ideological indoctrination? We'll answer that question in tonight's Hold the Line. Welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. Critical race theory is in the headlines. People are talking about it because there's a counter-revolution underway. You see, the left has put us through something of a cultural revolution, starting not just with Obamaism, but now the resistance against Trump and the continuation of Obamaism through the Biden administration. And people are recognizing that this society we live in is being transformed very rapidly, that there are ideas that go to the core of what we thought America was that undermines all of that, that's changing some of our fundamental conceptions about equality, about the way equal protection of the law should be a constant and a common principle for all of us, individual rights, individuality, a colorblind society as a goal. These are all things that are being undermined right now actively, and also a sense of disunity that is growing because of intentional exacerbation of division as a result of critical race theory. The Biden administration is currently engaged in a whole lot of social justice rhetoric, not so much in terms of action, but that all might change. They're starting to see the pushback against this, and so they have deployed, if you will, into the public conversation one of the most prominent still Democrats on the scene, former President Barack Obama, to basically tell you that critical race theory, no big deal, no one even really cares. It's not a problem, it's not something you have to worry about. Here he is.
You would think, with all the public policy debates that are taking place right now, that the Republican Party would be engaged in a significant debate about how are we going to deal with the economy, and what are we going to do about climate change, and what are we going to do about, lo and behold, the single most important issue to them apparently right now is critical race theory. Who knew that was the threat to our republic?
I mean, this is gaslighting. I think we can all see that. Obama thinks critical race theory is important because when he was president, he was pushing many of the same narratives that we're currently seeing and using the federal government to do it. And not only CRT, but also postmodernist feminism and just any social construct that the ideological left wants to use to divide and control the American people and to fundamentally transform our society. But there are a lot of people out there who are concerned about critical race theory, and it's not just right-wing pundits on TV or Republicans who are upset about things or whatever else the media wants to say. Here's a perfect example. This is a mother named Keisha King in Florida, a mother who is upset about what is being taught to her children in school. Now, she is black. She is talking about the way that CRT is being indoctrinated to her children, and this is her view of it. Play it.
Just coming off of May 31st, marking the 100 years of the Tulsa riots, it is sad that we are even contemplating something like critical race theory, where children will be separated by their skin color and deemed permanently oppressors or oppressed in 2021. That is not teaching the truth, unless you believe that whites are better than blacks. CRT in its outworking today is a teaching that there is a hierarchy in society where white, male, heterosexual, able-bodied people are deemed the oppressor, and anyone else outside of that status is oppressed. I don't know about you, but telling my child or any child that they are in a permanent oppressed status in America because they are black is racist, and saying that white people are automatically above me, my children, or any child is racist as well.
This goes right to the heart of the debate. Critical race theory claims to be an ideological construct that will get rid of racial inequality, when here's a black mother who is reiterating in many ways what has been said by others as criticism of CRT for a long time now, and that is that it actually creates racial strife. It creates a racial divide. It convinces people that there is an invisible system that is elevating some at the expense of others. And the only way, based on racial lines, and the only way for this to be addressed is to move that system in the opposite direction so that some people, based upon racial lines, based upon racial designation, will be elevated at the expense of others, but in a better way. This, of course, goes against what we learned from Justice Samuel Alito in the Supreme Court when he pointed out the very obvious: if you want to stop discrimination by race, you should stop discriminating by race. And this is what CRT rejects. Now, this is about power, it's about the Democrat Party, it's about the narrative of mobilization of minority voters for the left, as well as creating a climate of fear on the right, where if you say the wrong thing, you may be canceled because the CRT dogma, if you cross it, they'll come after you, right? If you challenge the CRT orthodoxy as a conservative, they may decide that you need to be made an example of, so people are much more quiet about it, and the CRT gets spread into schools, into corporations, all across the country. But don't worry, Obama's going to wave you off and say, CRT, what CRT? It's not even anything anybody has to be concerned about. Exactly. But it's even infiltrating the military and some of the places in the defense apparatus where you would say, hold on a second, can't we all agree that when it comes to this, when it comes to the United States military, there is simply no place for elevating these kind of superficial characteristics for jobs, for the roles that one has, over what makes somebody best at the job? Shouldn't the military be a pure meritocracy? Senator Tom Cotton pointed to this, and here's how that went.
The military has included the works of critical race theories on its reading list by authors like Abraham Henry Rogers, who now calls himself Abraham Kendi, and Robin DiAngelo. Mr. Kendi has written, quote, "The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination," end quote. Do you agree with that proposition?
I've not read that, and I don't, I certainly don't agree with what you just said.
Mr. Secretary, do you believe that race and sex should be the key factor when selecting combat leaders, rather than, say, operational excellence, technical proficiency, leadership, agility, and integrity?
I do not, Senator. I think what you just said should be key components in making any selection.
The key components. Okay, so we can agree on that, but is there any place for diversity and inclusion metrics when it comes to who's going to be frontline military, who's going to be, and by the way, gender as well plays into this. Can't we all agree that a meritocracy in the military is in all of our best interests, and that all this CRT nonsense should be pushed aside? Well, the left certainly doesn't agree with that. There's one other place I would note where you would think that the left would have to start to give way to reality here, and it has to do with CRT in schools, but they don't even want to deal with the fact that we have a lack of school choice these days, right? Here's a Minnesota parent. I really just wanted to play this for you so you could see it. A parent in Minnesota who is pointing out that all these liberals, all these leftists who say how much they care about people of color and so they have to teach CRT in the schools, the same leftists and liberals oppose school choice.
I don't know how anyone that says they care about people of color can just leave them in these failing schools when they know the schools are failing them. They know that a bad education is a direct pipeline to a life of dependence and crime, and they know they have a chance to vote on education savings accounts that will give the very people that they say they care most about a chance to get out of these schools. How can they just say no? How can they just say no? You have to be trapped. You have to stay in these schools even though 70% of you can't read, and then go with your lawn signs and your t-shirts chanting Black Lives Matter. It's absolute hypocrisy. Every kid, no matter their race or income, deserves a right to a good education. Enough with the platitudes about Black lives. It's time to do something tangible that will make a difference in their lives.
Well said. All right, according to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, over 180,000 migrants were apprehended crossing in the United States last month. That's close to 8 times the number that were apprehended in the same month last year. Up next, we'll have an update on the situation at the border with the Executive Director of the Center for Immigration Studies, Mark Krikorian. Stay with us. If you've ever thought about investing in real estate, I want you to take me up on this recommendation right now. Visit doneforyoubuck.com, where you can learn more about my friends at Done For You Real Estate. If you haven't checked them out yet, let me make this easy for you. These guys have found a way to make real estate investing straightforward, and their system flat out works. I know because I'm using it successfully. It allows everyday, hardworking Americans like you and me to finally own investment real estate without all the risk and difficulty of doing it on your own. I can't tell you in strong enough terms during this quick commercial how important it is you check these guys out. So how about this? If you visit doneforyoubuck.com, at the top of the page is a podcast interview I did with Done For You Real Estate, where you can hear my experience with their company in my own words. I'll tell you about it in detail, from picking the city to the house, getting the broker, getting the loan, even having a tenant in place so I get cash flow coming to me every month. Visit doneforyoubuck.com, listen to the podcast interview that I did there with the founders, and give my friends at Done For You Real Estate a chance to show you what they can do for you. Looks like Vice President Kamala Harris, the border czar, is sick and tired of being asked when she's actually going to head to the southern border. You can check out this exchange with an anchor at Univision.
I've said I'm going to go to the border. And
when are you going to the border, Vice President?
The administration has asked. I'm not finished. I've said I'm going to the border.
Whoa, spicy. Tomorrow marks 80 days since President Biden passed the baton, at least in theory, to Harris, the border czar, leading the response there. Not exactly leading. That's right, 80 days, folks. She still hasn't seen what's happening with her own eyes on U.S. soil at the U.S.-Mexico border. Here with reaction to this, we have Executive Director at the Center for Immigration Studies, Mark Krikorian. Mark, good to see you.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
So I got to ask you this. Before we get into the numbers, which are just mind-blowing, and the continued de facto open border status that we have, or near open borders, whatever one wants to call it, why do you think Kamala Harris, who is the border czar, I mean, she could just fly to San Diego. I mean, you can go to the border anywhere. It's not that hard. Why won't she go?
Because if she goes to the border, then she does become the border czar. She insists, no, I'm not the border czar. I'm in charge of root causes. So she would go to Guatemala and Mexico as she did recently. But to go to the border itself would mean that she kind of is now responsible for that problem. I think the Biden people kind of did this to sabotage her to some degree, because remember, they announced her as the border czar. She immediately said, oh, absolutely, I'm not the border czar. And now, if she were to go to the border, she ends up owning this problem, and everybody knows it's a disaster. She knows it's a disaster.
And there'd be photos of her at the border showing that she's the border czar, that later on, when everyone starts compiling the numbers, they'd say, wow, it's quite a job you did there, Kamala.
Absolutely, and they'll have a picture of her at the border, and next to it, they'll have another picture of raft after raft after raft coming across the Rio Grande and just being waved into the United States, which is what's happening. So no, I mean, I don't think she's going to be going to the border anytime soon. And if anything, she might be insisting in private that the president go to the border first. Then she can go, and then it's not her, then she doesn't own the whole thing. You know what I mean?
It sounds, Mark, like you kind of buy into the theory that Biden handed this to Kamala as, we used to call this in the CIA when someone would give you something that they didn't want to do. They'd say, why'd you drop a stinking fish on my desk? That's what people, I don't know if that's a phrase that other people use. I've only ever heard it in the CIA. But it sounds like this is kind of the stinking fish border issue, right? Nobody wants to really handle this, the Democrat Party. So he put this on Kamala's table.
Absolutely. Now, I don't know if the president himself decided that. I'm not sure what he's deciding at all, quite frankly. But it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if his wife came up with this idea as a way to shiv Harris for the way she treated Biden during the debates in the primary.
I remember that. She basically accused the now president, then candidate, of being a big racist on the debate stage. And I have a feeling that Jill Biden, also known as, by some, Dr. Jill Biden, probably did not like that very much. So you have an interesting theory there too, Mark. But I want to get to the numbers because they're just, it's crazy. Fiscal year 2021 Southwest border encounters, you got 929,868. So we're almost at 1 million for the fiscal year 2021, which is a lot, even in this day and age. Can you put this into perspective for us? When was the last time we saw anything like this? And if the current rate continues, what's it going to be like by the end of this fiscal year?
Yeah, I mean, we're only about 2/3 of the way through the fiscal year. So you're talking potentially not quite 1.5 million apprehensions this year if it continues at this rate. It'll probably go down a little in the summer just because the heat is punishing. And so some people are going to, try to skip it. But the fact is, it's been close to 200,000 a month for the past 3 months. And, we haven't seen anything like this in a generation. 20, 21 years ago, there were some comparable numbers. Although back then, they were almost all single men from Mexico. So we turned them around and sent them back if we caught them. Some of them got throughs, no question about it. But what we're seeing now is a big percentage of them are families and so-called unaccompanied minors. And they are all just let into the United States. And they're never going to leave. Even if they make an asylum claim and they get turned down, who's going to go look for them?
Yeah, there was also that moment where Kamala Harris was in Guatemala, and you remember in the speech she said, "Don't come because I believe you'll be turned back." It's like, you're the vice president of the United States, and one, you should know if they'd be turned back, and two, you also probably know, Kamala, that they're actually not being turned back. But then again, Mark, as you know, I went to the border, and I don't have a Secret Service detail and a government taxpayer-funded jet. But it turns out you can actually just go and talk to people and see what's going on. By the way, to put the numbers in context for everybody, Southwest border encounters in May, in 2019, 144,000. 2020, 23,000. Now that's COVID, the lockdown, obviously. 2021, 180,000. These are encounters, but Mark, when they say encounters, do they include gotaways, meaning people that actually just ran across the border and got into the U.S. interior? And what do those numbers look like when you add it to this?
No, it does not include gotaways. And there's kind of two categories of people that get away and get past the Border Patrol. The first category is people where the Border Patrol actually sees some evidence of it. They see the tracks. They may have seen them from a distance and they got away, or they saw them on a camera, something like that. And if I remember correctly, the April estimate for that group was 40,000. But then there's the other group of gotaways that nobody ever saw any tracks of. In other words, that they don't even know. It's sort of the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, as Rumsfeld used to say. So it's way above that. There's no question about it. And, it's Biden that's created this. He's invited these people. The smugglers themselves called Biden's comments and his actions la invitación, the invitation to come to the border.
Well, they've made it very clear. I mean, the president of Guatemala even said, they can talk about whatever they want, up north, but we're coming, or the cartels rather are grabbing people, and they're coming because of this Biden administration. So at least in Guatemala, they didn't get the DNC talking points in time, apparently. But there is somebody who's trying to do something about this. I want to know what you think this will actually mean and whether this will be helpful in any meaningful way. Governor Abbott of Texas, who I think has got a little bit of Ron DeSantis envy, he is saying he's going to build a wall in Texas style. Here's how that sounds.
Texas will build it ourselves. Those details about building the wall will be made next week. We've been through the process, however, of analyzing what it will take, the steps that are needed, the legal processes that are required. We believe that we can do it in a multi-step process.
So what is this going to mean, Mark? Are we actually going to get a wall in Texas?
We might. There's a lot Texas can do. Just to put a little plug in, I did my podcast this week with Ken Paxton, who's the Texas Attorney General, who's taken, played a role in pushing back against the Biden administration. And there are things that Texas can do. For instance, illegal immigrants, and especially their smugglers, are committing state crimes too, not just federal crimes. So Texas can do some prosecutions there potentially. What Abbott has said also is that he wants to complete some sections of the wall. That's useful, but it's not a solution, because the women and children and unaccompanied minors that come over, if they can get to our side of the river, even though they're still on the other side of the fence, because the fence, you can't build it in the river, it's got to be set back, they're in U.S. soil. The Border Patrol has to go and get them and bring them through the fence. So a fence is a tool that can be useful. It's not going to solve our problem at the border.
Yeah, the fence stops people that are trying to not get apprehended. And I've seen this and this is what's happening. Family units are asking to be apprehended. Here I am.
Themselves
Process me.
in.
Bring me food. I
Yep.
want a sandwich. That's what actually happens at the border now. Anyway, good to see you, Mark. Always appreciate it.
Thank you.
From the nursing home scandal to sexual assault allegations, you can only imagine the amount of legal fees piling up for Governor Andrew Cuomo. But that's the last thing he's worried about. Why? Because he's got New York taxpayers paying for it. Of course. We'll have more on that story and what New Yorkers think when we come back. I've been telling you for a while now about online thieves who can easily steal your home's title, but you don't have to take my word for it. Take it from this thief who stole over 150 homes and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. This is why you need Home Title Lock.
Nobody thinks that I can take their house and borrow against the house. No, I have title insurance for that. No, it's in my name, or he would have to get some special document. They would call me. You know, nobody's calling you. After I've stolen the title, borrowed against it, or sold the property, or done whatever I've done with it, it's 60 to 90 days to even figure out that they're the victim of this crime. You know, by that point, you start getting foreclosure notices, and you realize you've got 4 mortgages on your house. Not only that, you don't even own your home anymore. It's not even in your name.
Heard enough? Don't let this crime happen to you. Go to HometitleLock.com and register your address to see if you're already a victim and enter code RADIO for 30 free days of protection. That's code RADIO at HometitleLock.com. Despite getting a $5 million book deal, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is using $2.5 million in taxpayer money to pay for his legal fees for his endless scandals. I mean, you really can't make this stuff up. Our next guest went around New York City asking New Yorkers how they felt about that. Watch this.
New York taxpayers are actually paying $2.5 million. Do you think that's fair?
No, what the hell? No, that's preposterous. I didn't even know that. But that's crazy just to find that out, though. You cashed in. Now you want us to turn around and pay for your sexual or your little things that you were doing? No, that's a dub. We're not doing that.
No. He's got enough money to do what he needs to do. Why should the taxpayers have to pay for his legal fees? That's absurd.
Video journalist at the Daily Caller, Katie McDuffie, joins me now on set here in NYC. Katie?
It's great.
Does seem kind of absurd, doesn't it? Were you surprised, and thank you so much for being here, by the way, were you surprised at how many people were very strongly in favor of this as Crazy Town?
Well, I actually knew that they were going to be like, no, I'm not paying for that. But what I was surprised was I actually had to tell them about Governor Cuomo's scandals, that he sent COVID-positive patients back into nursing homes, killing over 15,000 New Yorkers. None of them knew that, which was crazy to me. But then I took a step back and I thought about the way the media has covered this. And the truth is, a lot of people have turned a blind eye to this. I mean, the CNNs didn't report on that, and it really was people like us and the Daily Caller and Fox News that covered this. So that's what I was definitely surprised about, but of course I knew that they weren't going to be happy about the taxes.
So I gotta say, as a New Yorker who was part of, everybody here it felt like was watching those Cuomo press conferences in the early days, and there's been such a fall from grace for that guy, so that there were even those, I had friends here on the city council, or a friend on the city council, who was saying he thought that Cuomo was going to resign. This was about 90 days ago, that it might actually happen. Looks like he's going to stay. So everyone seemed to be up on this, but you're telling me you came across people on the street, and this was about the nursing home scandal, by the way, as well as the sexual harassment stuff. You came across people on the street who didn't even know about the nursing home scandal at all? Was it like you had to jog their memory, or were they just completely blank on this?
So I basically had to explain to them what happened. I also had to tell them that he also cashed in $5 million for his book, which is at the end of the MOS. But it really was crazy to see that not many people knew about it. And you do think that, in May of last year, when you were when he was talking at these press conferences, he's got to be running for president one day, and then all these scandals happen. So it is crazy to see that. And a year later, he's still in office, and he's using New York taxpayer money to pay for his legal bills. It is insane to think that. And I did interview Janice Dean about this, who lost both of her in-laws. She's a New York resident, so the fact that she is paying for his legal fees is really insane to me.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, was there anybody that you spoke to? Did you come across anyone? I know obviously when a man on the street, you got to pick the most interesting clips. Was anyone really pro-Cuomo? Was anyone saying, he's done a great job, or I feel like he's really led us through? Because in the early days, as you know, he wasn't just a New York hero, he became this national figure. So did you have somebody who's like, yeah, maybe I didn't know about this, but I thought Cuomo did a great job? This just reminds me of my theory that as a New Yorker, I've never met anyone who actually voted for Mayor de Blasio. This is a big joke that I have that runs on. Did you meet anyone who's still a big Cuomo fan on the street?
Not a single person, but I will say the last time I was in New York prior to this, I did a man on the street, who do you dislike more, Cuomo or de Blasio? And it was pretty even, but both of those, Governor Cuomo and de Blasio, it seems like they don't have the best reputation. We'll have to see who gets that new governor spot.
Yeah, I have to tell you that I think the best thing that happened to to Mayor de Blasio in the last year was the downfall of Cuomo, because now people say, well, at least he's not the worst New York politician. That spot may have gone now to the governor instead of the mayor of New York City. But we have another story I wanted to get your take on here, and it's a girl in Loudoun County. She's an 8th grade girl. She's speaking out about to the school board there. They're letting transgender males use the female bathroom. Here's what she said.
2 years ago, I was told Policy 1040 was just an umbrella philosophy, and you weren't going to allow boys into the girls' locker rooms. But here you are doing just that. Everyone knows what a boy is, even you. Your proposed policies are dangerous and rooted in sexism. When woke kids asked me if I was a lesbian or a trans boy because I cut my hair short, it should tell you these modern identities are superficial. My guidance counselor's response to my concerns about bathroom privacy and safety was, well, there are stalls in the bathrooms. Now boys are reading erotica in the classrooms next to girls, and you want to give them access to girls' locker rooms, and you want to force girls to call those boys she. You do this in the name of inclusivity while ignoring the girls who will pay the price. Your policies choose boys' wants over girls' needs.
All right, so we had you on before to talk about the transgender sports decision of the Olympics, but those are adults, right? Those are full-grown adults who are
14.
This girl is an 8th grader, and she's saying things like, everyone knows what a girl is, and what's amazing is that right now we're told no, actually, that the policies that are reflected by her school board are that what makes a girl or a boy is a subject of debate, and that there has to be this new bathroom policy that allows biological males to be changing and around females in the locker room. What do you make of this policy?
Well, I mean, that girl's 14 years old, so I have to commend her for speaking up about this. But I have to say, in our education system these days, you're asked your pronouns before you're even asked your name. So this is going to be a tough battle for her. And I have to say, I feel quite bad for her because, you know, all these articles have come out with that speech that she did. And you have to think she's going to have a tough time getting into college because this is what our education system supports, and if you go against it, it's automatic cancel culture. So, I mean, it is crazy to think that this 14-year-old girl has to speak up about this, but what an amazing job she did.
It's also troubling, you know, she says in that clip that she gets a lot of pressure from her peers as well. So clearly, I think there's generally a perception that this is just from the adults and the kids obey, but maybe think it's strange. No, now it seems that in some of these school systems where they're making these very politicized decisions about gender identity issues and bathroom usage and athletics competition. I know you're a recent D1 athlete yourself, and we talked about this issue recently. But the kids are actually getting brainwashed to the point where there's peer pressure on the other kids. That feels like an addition here. That feels like something new.
Yeah, it does feel like something new. And it is crazy. All over TikTok, we have these teachers that are really forcing these beliefs on kids when they're too young to even understand it. And I think our own reporter, Mary Margaret Olahan, she's done a great job of covering this. We know the Cuties Netflix scandal we saw. And this is being not only pushed by educators, but by big corporations like Netflix, Uber. I mean, you really can't escape it these days.
Katie McDuffie of the Daily Caller. Good to see you. Thanks so much for coming in on set. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to be here in studio.
Good to see you. All right. Coming up, for years now, the left has engaged in a campaign to silence its political opposition by controlling our language and manipulating speech through political correctness. Just how did we get here? Michael Knowles from the Daily Wire, author of the forthcoming book Speechless, joins us next to talk about just that. Before critical race theory became a common phrase, before there was whiteness or wokeness, there was political correctness. For decades now, the American left has waged a constant campaign to control our language and by doing so, dominate public discourse and with it, politics. By manipulating the language, the left has been able to set the terms of any debate. Say the wrong thing and you're liable to be met with censorship and intimidation. With the advent of social media and the rise of cancel culture, the threat faced by those who break from politically correct orthodoxy has grown even greater. So just how we get to this point? Michael Knowles is the author of the forthcoming book, Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds. You can pick it up on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, that table outside your church where they sell books or wherever, starting June 22nd. Michael, thank you so much for joining us, man. Good to see you.
Buck, great to be with you.
So in your book, you trace the roots of political correctness back to the early 20th century. How did this method of silencing political opposition arise? Take us to a little history tour here.
I'll take you on a very brief tour of the last 100 years, because I think when people think about wokeness or cancel culture or political correctness, which is what it used to be called, they think this is about 30 years old or so. It's kind of the early 90s or the late 80s. Maybe sometimes then people say, it was actually kind of in the 60s you saw the beginnings of it. It goes back much further. It goes back to the 1920s at least. And ultimately, I think it goes back to a phrase from Karl Marx. The phrase, many evil things go back to Karl Marx. And his phrase was that we need to engage in the ruthless criticism of all that exists. And from this phrase, you get academic movements like critical theory. We're talking a lot these days about one of the derivations of that, critical race theory. And what's the theory? The theory is very simple. The theory is to criticize. And you can see from the very beginning, there are brilliant theorists like the Italian communist Antonio Gramsci, who said that the reason the radicals' revolutions keep failing is because the conservatives have cultural hegemony. The workers of the world will not unite because they actually prefer their own way of life and their traditions and their customs to the leftists' radical theories. So the key here is that you need to, as a radical, take over the institutions, transform the culture, transform the common sense. No revolution can succeed if it doesn't have the common sense. And then after waging this war of position for many, many years, you can, as happened in the 1980s and 1990s, finally begin to wield that kind of political power. And the sad fact of it is, I think we as conservatives have gotten this thing wrong every single step of the way. There's this very strange fact, which is that we have been fighting against political correctness, cancel culture, wokeness for decades and decades. And it always seems like the harder we fight, the more ground we lose. And the reason for this, I think, is we have mistakenly understood this battle as one between free speech on the one hand and censorship on the other. And I don't think it's that at all. I think really this is a battle between two competing sets of standards. And both sides are going to embrace some kind of free speech, and both sides are going to embrace some kinds of censorship. And the question is, what speech are we going to tolerate and what speech are we going to censor?
So am I right in thinking then that your part of your argument is that there are going to be rules, there are going to be cultural mores, and you know the framework for discussion will exist in one way or another. So we can either try to help shape it or let them shape it. But this notion that there'll be this neutral playing field where ideas, where the ideological combatants will be on level ground, that's kind of a fantasy. Is that right?
Bingo. In the 1950s, you would be canceled if you were a communist. Today, you will be canceled if you're not a communist. But there will always be some kind of canceling. There's always going to be some kind of taboo. Certain speech is always going to be off limits. You know, from the earliest days of our country, whole swaths of speech were illegal. Sedition, fraud, threats, libel, obscenity. And those sorts of protections have existed throughout the history of our country. I mean, even as recently as 2009 at the federal level, a pornographer went to prison for 4 years almost for obscenity. It wasn't for any other crime. It was because of obscenity. But now that those sorts of standards have weakened and they've changed. I know that we on the right very often like to say that we understand free speech so much better than the left does. Not true. I think that these guys who developed political correctness and wokeness and cancel culture, I think they understand free speech much better than we do. And I think that they have used this advantage to utterly transform the culture. And so we keep yelling until we're blue in the face about how we need to defend free speech. Well, I think the left understands the actual tradition of free speech in America, and that's how they've perverted and transformed it.
So really this just comes down to power dynamics then, often more than principles. Is that fair to say?
I wouldn't go that far. Political power is a huge part of it. And we on the right feel very uncomfortable wielding political power. There are a lot of so-called conservatives who I think would prefer to lose with dignity, as they say. They're never dignified when they do it, but they always talk about losing with dignity rather than winning and actually enforcing some kind of political power. But I do think that it needs to be quite principled. So according to the old standards, a man is a man and a woman is a woman. According to the new anti-standard of political correctness, some men really are women. And if you refuse to call Bruce Jenner a woman, then you're a bigot and you're going to be ostracized and you could be kicked off of social media or whatever. I think reason and principle plays a role here. I think that the conservative standard is the reasonable standard, and you can make logical arguments with recourse to truth. And for the left, you actually can't. They deny the possibility of objective truth. The Smithsonian Institution just a couple years ago said that objective truth is a white supremacist dog whistle, right? So they're denying that logic and reason. But beyond that, when we recognize the principles, when we recognize the truth here, we need to be willing, and I know this is going to make some conservatives uncomfortable, especially the squishy types, we need to be willing to enforce those standards.
What do you think that means for us going forward in this era of big tech suppression and manipulation and the near cultural hegemony that the left has already achieved? How do we start taking back ground?
So I'll give you a very practical way to do this. I think that any serious opposition to political correctness and wokeness and all the rest of it is going to be a just and prudent censorship. I think that to save free speech, conservatives need to embrace the inevitability and necessity of some kind of censorship. So what should we censor? Well, let's use a very basic example: obscenity. For the entire history of our republic, porn has been heavily regulated when it was not outright illegal. Up until very recently, if I wanted to go get a Playboy, I'd have to go down the street and show my ID. This sort of stuff was not available to everybody, and you had to go to a seedy place and take on a lot of cultural shame to do it. Today, obviously, it is ubiquitous, and some people are making the ridiculous argument that pornography is a human right, and we have some sort of sacred First Amendment right to pornography. But why did our founding fathers make obscenity illegal? Why have wise statesmen always heavily regulated obscenity? Because obscenity is the sort of speech that actually undermines speech. By arousing people's basest passions and appealing to the lowest, most prurient desires, you're actually compromising one's own freedom. Another example would be fraud. Why is fraud not protected by free speech or by the First Amendment? Because fraud abuses speech to deceive people. It actually undermines people's confidence in speech. And so there's a line from G.K. Chesterton who said, "There is a thought that stops thought, and that is the only thought that ought to be stopped." And I think we have just completely lost the thread here and very often conflated liberty, true liberty, with licentiousness. This was a distinction very important to the founding fathers. Now we seem to have conflated the two. And in so doing, we've actually undermined our free speech, even as we pretend to have expanded it. And so I think we need to get much smarter about stopping the thought that stops thought. Bruce Jenner is not a woman. Pornography is not a sacred First Amendment right. There are standards. Some things are good and true and beautiful, and that's what we need to defend. And we need to suppress things that are false and ugly and wicked.
Sounds good to me. Michael Knowles, good luck on your book, man. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Buck.
New York Times takes home a Pulitzer Prize for its coverage of the pandemic. I guess being wrong all the time really pays off. We got that story and more in Quick Hits. We're living in very uncertain times, and being prepared for the unknown is more important than ever. I'm sure you've noticed that the world we live in today is anything but predictable. The government is passing massive spending bills. The Federal Reserve is printing trillions in fiat currency, and many experts are predicting inflation could run rampant in the coming months. That could spell disaster for the dollars in your bank account. We could all benefit from something a little more reliable right about now. What could be more reliable than real gold and silver? I'm talking about real gold and silver you can actually hold right in your hands. Call the Oxford Gold Group now and learn how easy it is to get real gold and silver sent securely directly to your home, or how you can have real gold and silver placed in your IRA or 401k. Just call the Oxford Gold Group at 833-600-GOLD and ask for your free guide on owning gold and silver. Again, call the Oxford Gold Group right now at 833-600-GOLD. The Oxford Gold Group is the only gold company I trust. Call them right now at 833-600-GOLD. One more time, that's 833-600-GOLD. The New York Times takes home a Pulitzer and the G7 goes woke. We got those stories coming up in Quick Hits. Let's get to it. New York Times, it's a left-wing propaganda organization. Not even really just for the Democrats anymore. They're pretty far left in general, even for Democrats. They've printed a lot of stuff that's not true. They can't actually have people who are supposed to bring in diverse voices in terms of their politics to the editorial board because they're so woke that they don't even think it's possible or it's acceptable to have conservatives like Senator Tom Cotton write an op-ed for them. But the Times just put out the staff of the New York Times has won a Pulitzer Prize for public service for coverage of the pandemic. Here are the award-winning pieces. I just want to say the New York Times has been completely cowardly in the way that it has covered the pandemic. It was political in how it tried to blame Trump for all of this. They did not ask stories like, oh, I don't know, did the virus leak from a lab or was it from a cave with some bats in it somewhere randomly in China that then got taken to a wet market? What really happened there? Was the New York Times engaged in fear-mongering to help Joe Biden get elected because everything was going to be blamed on Trump in 2020? Or are they really telling people to be fair-minded in how they viewed the mitigation measures and lockdowns and all the rest? Did they ask tough questions about masks? Did they ask tough questions about Fauci? No, they did not. But they get a Pulitzer because that's what this is all about now. Journalists have created a self-licking ice cream cone of congratulation among each other for doing the dirty political work of the DNC and pretending like they're the truth tellers. You know, they're the great guardians of our democracy. Speaking about journalists being a bunch of huge frauds who lie to you constantly, look, they're allowed to do this. This is an editorial decision. I understand the difference, but I just want to show you the kind of mentality on display here you have. On the one hand, you have, these are Time magazine covers of the most recent two presidents. On the left, you have Joe Biden looking like Maverick from Top Gun, staring down Putin in his glasses. Yeah, with his aviators. Joe Biden's just so cool. He's so with it. He's amazing. He's like a superhero and a badass, and he's the best. You look on the right, Donald Trump, belly protruding, peering down at a tiny, terrified, crying child. This is really, I mean, this right here is an encapsulation entirely of just how much the left-wing media, the Democrat media, aligns with Democrats over Republicans. This is really showing you in real time what we're talking about here. And then there's what's going on at the G7. You know, this is for the G7 nations, big, important international conference on how they're going to tackle some of the world's most challenging problems, stuff like that. Boris Johnson, this is what the UK Prime Minister is saying at the G7. Pretty woke.
I think there is the potential to generate many, many millions of high-wage, high-skill jobs, and I think that is what the people of our countries now want us to focus on. They want us to be sure that we're beating the pandemic together and discussing how we'll never have a repeat of what we've seen, but also that we're building back better together and building back greener, and building back fairer, and building back more equal, and how shall I, more, in a more gender-neutral and perhaps a more feminine way.
Build it back in a more feminine way. Yes, build it back in a neutral fashion. Oh my gosh. And then Kamala is happy this week is over. I got to tell you, that's true. This is just a reminder of the kind of moments that she had, the border czar who doesn't go to the border.
And then what happens when they arrive at our borders? We, who have erected the Statue of Liberty, they arrive at our borders and we say, go back to where you came from. That is inhumane and it is immoral.
5 minutes later.
Do not come. Do not come.
And I believe if you come to our border, you will be turned back.
Almost like she's just an opportunist who will say whatever benefits her in the moment, but what do I know? That's it for tonight's Hold the Line. The No Spin News with Bill O'Reilly is up next. Shields high.